In the glittering world of Manhattan's elite, some secrets are sealed with wealth, others with power, and the darkest with blood. This is the story of Jericho Slade, a billionaire who thought he had everything. A sprawling penthouse overlooking Central Park, a name that commanded respect, and a beautiful, fragile wife he could break whenever he pleased. But he never once questioned why his sickly wife Estelle never flinched at the sight of a needle, or how her pulse remained steady even under his most terrifying threats. He was about to learn that the woman he tormented daily wasn't just his wife. She was a ghost, an instrument of death in hiding, and he had just given her a reason to come back to life. The penthouse apartment was a testament to sterile, exorbitant wealth. It occupied the entire top floor of one of Manhattan's most prestigious buildings, a glass-walled palace in the sky where the city sprawled below like a diamond-dusted carpet. To the outside world, this was the home of Jericho Slade, the charismatic CEO of Slade Global, and his beautiful, perpetually ill wife, Estelle. It was a picture of success and devotion, carefully curated for the pages of Forbes and Vanity Fair. Inside, it was a prison. Estelle stood by the floor-to-ceiling windows, her reflection a pale, slender silhouette against the vibrant sunset. She was dressed in a simple, cream-colored cashmere dress that hung loosely on her frame, making her look even more fragile than she already was. Her long, dark hair was tied back in a loose knot, and her face, devoid of makeup, was classically beautiful, but etched with a weariness that went beyond her supposed chronic illness. She traced the condensation on the cold glass with a fingertip, her breathing slow and even, a practiced calm that had become her only shield. The sound of the private elevator door hissing open broke the silence. The cadence of the footsteps that followed was all too familiar. One set sharp, heavy, and impatient. Jericho's. The other, a staccato click-clack of stilettos that belonged to his mistress, Victoria Devereaux. Estelle didn't turn. She kept her eyes on the fading light, her posture unchanged. She had learned that reacting was a form of currency, and she refused to give them anything of value. "Still moping by the window, darling?" Jericho's voice was smooth, a rich baritone that charmed boardrooms and disarmed investors. Here in their home, it was laced with a chilling disdain. He came to stand behind her, his expensive cologne, a cloying mix of sandalwood and entitlement, washing over her. "You'd think for the amount of money I spend on your doctors, you'd at least have the energy to greet your husband." Victoria, a bombshell with fiery red hair and a dress that looked sprayed onto her surgically perfected body, glided into the room. She draped herself over a white leather sofa, crossing her long legs with a theatrical sigh. Her eyes, the color of shrewd emeralds, scanned Estelle with unconcealed contempt. "Leave her be, Jules," Victoria said, her voice a purr. "She's probably contemplating which new, exotic disease she'll develop next week. Is it Peruvian fainting syndrome this time? Or perhaps Victorian consumption?" Jericho chuckled, a low, cruel sound. He placed his hands on Estelle's shoulders, his grip just a little too tight. "She's a work of art, isn't she? So delicate, so breakable." His thumb pressed into the sensitive junction of her neck and shoulder, a casual display of ownership and threat. Estelle's heart rate remained a steady 60 beats per minute. Her breathing did not hitch. Inside, a cold, dark river flowed, a part of her she had locked away for years. She was a dormant volcano, and they were carelessly dancing on the crater's edge. She had been trained to withstand pain far greater than a bully's grip. She knew 12 different ways to use his own thumb to shatter his larynx, but she remained still. The mission wasn't over. Survival was the mission. "I was just enjoying the view," Estelle said, her voice soft, almost a whisper. It was the voice they expected, the voice of a victim. "The view!" Jericho scoffed, releasing her and walking towards the bar. "The view is for people who do things, who conquer. You just exist." He poured himself a generous measure of whiskey, the amber liquid glinting in the dimming light. He then poured another, handing it to Victoria, who accepted it with a triumphant smirk. Victoria took a sip. "We had the most incredible day, Estelle. We closed the Nakatomi deal." The board was eating out of Jericho's hand. She looked pointedly at Estelle. I was there, of course. Someone has to make sure he's taken care of, that his tie is straight, that his public image is perfect. It's a full-time job, keeping a titan like him at the top. The implication was clear. I do the job you're too sick and useless to do. Estelle finally turned from the window, her gaze sweeping over them. It was a placid, almost vacant look, but behind it, she was cataloging everything. Victoria's dress, a bright crimson, would make her an easy target in low light. The stiletto heels were a liability, easily broken, a potential weapon. Jericho's watch, a Patek Philippe, was heavy enough to crack a skull if swung with enough force. The observations were automatic, a deeply ingrained part of her that she could never erase. That's wonderful, Jericho. Congratulations, she said, her voice perfectly modulated to convey wifely pride. He sneered. Don't pretend you understand what it means. It means I just made more money in an afternoon than your family has seen in 3 generations. He downed his whiskey in one gulp and slammed the crystal tumbler down on the marble countertop. The sound cracked through the room. And we're going to celebrate, Victoria announced, standing up and slinking towards him. She ran a perfectly manicured hand down his chest. We've booked a table at Per Se, the private room. She paused, turning her venomous gaze back to Estelle. Don't wait up. In fact, why don't you have one of your nurses give you a sedative? A nice long sleep. You need your rest after all. Jericho wrapped his arm around Victoria's waist, pulling her flush against him. He looked at his wife, a woman he had married for her prestigious family name and her docile beauty, and saw nothing but a burden. Yes, Estelle, go to bed. The adults have things to do. They laughed as they walked back to the elevator, their arms around each other, a portrait of arrogant betrayal. The doors slid shut, and Estelle was once again alone in the silent, opulent cage. She stood motionless for a full minute, her eyes closed. The mask of the frail, sick wife did not slip. Not yet. But the cold river inside her began to flow a little faster. She walked not to her bedroom, but to the small, soundproofed home gym Jericho had installed for his own use. Ignoring the state-of-the-art treadmills and weight machines, she went to a simple pull-up bar. She reached up, her hands gripping the cold metal. With a smooth, controlled motion, she pulled herself up, her chin clearing the bar with ease. She held the position, her muscles coiled with a power that would have shocked anyone who saw her. There was no strain on her face, only a deadly focus. 1 pull-up, 2, 10, 20. Her body, the one Jericho and Victoria saw as a fragile vessel of sickness, was a finely tuned weapon. The chronic illness was a masterpiece of deception, a long con played with herbs that mimic symptoms, beta blockers to keep her heart rate artificially low, and an acting performance worthy of an Oscar. She was hiding in plain sight, in the last place anyone would ever think to look for, the Nightingale, a phantom assassin who had vanished from the world's intelligence agencies 5 years ago. She had wanted a normal life, a quiet life, away from the blood and the shadows. She had thought marrying Jericho Slade, a man of wealth and public stature, would be the perfect cover. She had mistaken his arrogance for strength, his possessiveness for passion. She had been wrong. Dropping lightly to the floor, her feet making no sound, she walked back into the living room. Victoria had deliberately left her lipstick-stained glass on a priceless antique side table, a small act of territorial defiance. Estelle picked it up. She looked at the crimson smear on the crystal. A name echoed in the silence of her mind, a name from her past, her handler. Emotion is a liability, Faye, a weapon your enemy will always use against you. Her name wasn't Estelle, it was Faye, and for the first time in 5 years, she felt the ice around her heart begin to crack. Not with pain or sadness, but with a cold, clear, and terrifying rage. Jericho and Victoria thought they were celebrating a business deal. They had no idea they were celebrating the beginning of their end. The Nightingale was starting to remember how to sing. 2 weeks later, the annual Slade Global Foundation Gala was in full swing. It was the pinnacle of the New York social calendar, a night where old money and new tech collided in a sea of champagne, couture, and performative philanthropy. The grand ballroom of the Plaza Hotel was dripping with crystal and orchids, a backdrop for the city's most powerful figures. Jericho was in his element. He moved through the crowd like a shark, a charming smile fixed on his face, shaking hands with senators and tech moguls, his every move projecting power. Victoria was at his side, a vision in emerald green silk, playing the part of the devoted partner to perfection. She was the power behind the throne, and she made sure everyone knew it. Estelle was expected to be there, of course. It was part of the charade. She was the sick, beautiful wife, an object of pity and a testament to Jericho's noble character for standing by her. She was seated at the main table, a ghost in a gown of pale silver that made her look ethereal and translucent. She sipped her water, offered quiet, tired smiles, and occasionally pressed a delicate hand to her temple, a subtle performance of her chronic fatigue. From her vantage point, she saw everything. She noted the security details, their positions, their weapons, the subtle bulges under their tuxedos. She saw the rival CEOs watching Jericho with envious eyes, the journalists hungry for a scoop, the wives sizing each other up. It was a different kind of battlefield from the ones she knew, but the principles were the same. Identify the threats, know the exits, and control the narrative. "You're looking especially pale tonight, darling," Jericho murmured, leaning over her as he briefly returned to the table. His breath smelled of expensive wine. "Try not to collapse before my speech. It would be terribly off-brand." "I'll do my best," she replied, her voice a soft melody of submission. Victoria, who had followed him, placed a hand on his arm. "Don't worry, Jules. If she faints, I'll catch her. We can't have her ruining your big night." Her smile was pure acid. Estelle simply inclined her head, her eyes downcast. But as they moved away, her gaze lifted, cool and calculating. She watched them work the room, their laughter echoing. She saw the way Victoria's hand lingered on Jericho's back, a clear signal of intimacy. She saw the way he whispered in her ear, his eyes crinkling in a way they never did for his wife. They were so confident, so brazen in their betrayal. Later, during Jericho's keynote address, a self-aggrandizing speech about innovation and legacy, Estelle excused herself. She needed a moment, she whispered to a concerned socialite at her table. She didn't go to the powder room. Instead, she slipped through a service corridor, her silver heels making no sound on the tiled floor. The noise of the gala faded behind her, replaced by the clatter of the hotel kitchen and the hum of machinery. She moved with a liquid grace that defied her fragile appearance, her senses on high alert. Her target was not in the ballroom. He was in a private office on the mezzanine level. A man named Roman Petrov, a Russian oligarch and a silent partner in Jericho's Nakatomi deal. Estelle, or rather Faye, knew that the deal wasn't just about technology. It was about laundering money, a river of dark funds flowing from Petrov's illicit operations through Slade Global's legitimate channels. Jericho wasn't just a bully, he was a criminal. And he was using her family's name, the very name he'd married her for, to sanitize his filth. She found the office easily. The lock was a joke, a simple tumbler she could have picked with a bobby pin. She didn't need to. A waiter, his face tight with fear, was just leaving the room. He saw her and flinched, almost dropping his tray. "Ma'am?" "You shouldn't be back here." Faye gave him a small, helpless smile. "I'm so sorry, I think I'm lost. My husband, Jericho Slade. I was just looking for a quiet place to sit for a moment." The waiter's expression softened with pity. "Of course, Mrs. Slade. The ballroom is just back that way." "Thank you," she said, her voice breathy. As he turned, her hand, as fast as a striking snake, shot out and plucked the key card he had just used from his jacket pocket. He never felt a thing. She waited 30 seconds, then swiped the card. The light flashed green, and she slipped inside, closing the door silently behind her. Roman Petrov was sitting at a large mahogany desk, a phone pressed to his ear, barking orders in Russian. He was a thick, brutal-looking man with a shaved head and a broken nose. He didn't notice her at first. Faye took a moment to appreciate the scene. This was her true element: the silence, the tension, the hunt. The sick, weak Estelle was a costume she wore. But Faye, the nightingale, was who she was. Petrov ended his call and finally saw her. His eyes narrowed. "Who the hell are you? How did you get in here?" he growled, his hand instinctively moving to a drawer in his desk. Faye stepped into the light, letting it catch the silver of her dress. She put a hand to her chest in a gesture of feminine fright. "Oh my, I am so terribly sorry. I was looking for the ladies' room." Her voice was Estelle's, soft, fluttering, harmless. Petrov relaxed slightly, but his eyes remained suspicious. "This is a private office. Get out." "Of course," she said, taking a step back toward the door. Then she stopped, her head tilting. "That's a beautiful pen," she said, her eyes fixing on a heavy, gold-plated fountain pen on his desk. "May I?" Before he could answer, she glided forward, her movements impossibly fast. She picked up the pen. Her demeanor shifted in a heartbeat. The frail, lost woman vanished, replaced by a predator. Her eyes, no longer soft and vacant, were now chips of ice. Petrov's eyes widened in shock. He finally realized his mistake. He lunged for the drawer. He was too slow. Faye moved in a blur. She sidestepped his clumsy reach, brought the heavy pen up in a tight, vicious arc, and jammed the pointed end into the carotid artery in his neck. It was a precise, targeted strike, learned and practiced 1,000 times. There was a sickening, wet crunch. Petrov gurgled, his hands flying to his throat. Blood, dark and thick, pulsed from the wound. He stared at her, his eyes wide with disbelief and terror. He tried to speak, but only a choked, gurgling sound came out. He staggered back, knocking over his chair, and collapsed to the floor. Faye watched him die, her expression unreadable. Her pulse was steady. Her breathing was even. She felt nothing. No remorse, no satisfaction. It was simply a task, executed with lethal efficiency. Petrov was a loose end, a threat not just to her, but to the quiet life she had tried to build. Jericho had brought this darkness to her doorstep, and she was going to return it to him, tenfold. She wiped the pen clean on Petrov's jacket and placed it back on the desk, exactly where it had been. She took a tiny, almost invisible listening device from the clasp of her evening bag and affixed it to the underside of the desk. Then, with the same spectral silence, she slipped out of the office, leaving the dead oligarch in a spreading pool of his own dark money. She walked calmly back through the service corridor, her heart a cold, steady drum. As she re-entered the ballroom, the cacophony of the gala washed over her. Jericho was just finishing his speech, his voice booming with false sincerity. "And it is in that spirit of building a better future that I thank you all for your incredible generosity tonight." The room erupted in applause. Jericho stood at the podium, basking in the adoration, a king in his castle. He scanned the crowd and his eyes briefly met Estelle's as she returned to her seat. He gave a slight, dismissive nod, acknowledging her return. She gave him a small, weak smile in return. The perfect, sickly wife. He had no idea that while he was collecting accolades, his ghost of a wife had just committed a perfect murder 100 feet away. He had no idea that the foundation he had built was already beginning to crumble, brought down by the woman he saw as his most fragile, pathetic possession. The gala was a triumph for him, but for Faye, it was just the opening move in a game he didn't even know he was playing. The hunt had begun. The death of Roman Petrov sent a shockwave through the city's underbelly. Though on the surface it was reported as a tragic, unsolved robbery gone wrong. The official narrative was clean. A powerful man, a victim of random urban violence. There were no witnesses, no forced entry, and the only thing missing was his wallet, a clever touch Faye had added by taking it and disposing of it in a trash can miles away. The police were baffled. Jericho Slade, however, was not baffled. He was terrified. He locked himself in his home office, the one with the panoramic view of a city that suddenly felt hostile. The bug Faye had planted under Petrov's desk was now useless, but the one she'd placed under Jericho's own desk weeks ago was a goldmine. She sat in her darkened bedroom, a state-of-the-art receiver hidden in a hollowed-out copy of War and Peace, listening to her husband's world unravel. "It can't be a coincidence," he yelled into his phone. His voice, usually so controlled, was raw with panic. "Roman is dead, the night of the gala, in my hotel. This wasn't a robbery, this was a message?" Faye listened, a faint, cold smile gracing her lips. The man on the other end of the line was likely one of Petrov's lieutenants, someone equally panicked. Security is looking at the tapes, Jericho continued, pacing furiously. They said a waiter was in the corridor, and some woman. My God! He stopped pacing. The silence crackled with his dawning horror. They said she looked lost. A guest. Faye's smile widened. She had worn the perfect camouflage. His own wife. No one would ever suspect the fragile Mrs. Slade. His next call was to Victoria. Something's wrong, he said, his voice low and urgent. Petrov is dead. What? Victoria's voice, tinny through the receiver, was sharp with alarm. How? Where? At the gala. They're calling it a robbery, but I know better. Someone is sending me a message, Tori. Someone knows about our arrangement. Don't be paranoid, Jules, she snapped, though a tremor of fear was evident in her tone. It was probably just some junkie. This is New York. It has nothing to do with us. A junkie doesn't get into a locked office on a private floor during a high-security event, he roared. Think! Who knows? Who would have the nerve? Faye listened as they spiraled, their conversation a frantic dance of accusation and denial. They suspected their rivals, Petrov's other associates, everyone but the silent, pale figure who walked the halls of their own home. Their guilt was a prism, refracting their fear onto every person in their orbit except the one who was actually responsible. Over the next few days, the change in Jericho was palpable. The smug arrogance was replaced by a tense, jittery paranoia. He snapped at his staff, triple-checked the locks on the doors, and hired a new, more expensive security detail. He started watching Estelle too, but not with suspicion. He watched her with a renewed, almost vicious contempt. Her perceived weakness, her constant state of illness, now seemed to mock his own unraveling control. One evening, he stormed into the living room where Estelle was reading. He'd been drinking. She could smell it from across the room. Look at you, he spat, gesturing at her with his glass of whiskey, sitting there so calm, so useless. Do you have any idea what's happening in the real world? The pressure I'm under? Estelle slowly lowered her book. Is everything all right, Jericho? She asked, her voice the epitome of gentle concern. No, everything is not all right. He slammed the glass down, whiskey sloshing onto a white rug. My world is on fire, and you just sit there, breathing my expensive air. You're a leech, you know that? A beautiful, pathetic leech. Victoria entered, drawn by the noise. She stood by Jericho's side, a united front of cruelty. He's right, you know, she said to Estelle. He's out there fighting dragons, and what do? You cultivate new symptoms. Maybe you should try to be useful for once. A supportive wife might ask what's wrong. She might try to help. Faye looked from one to the other. It was time to gently stoke the fire. I did ask, she said softly, her eyes wide and innocent. I asked if everything was all right. She turned her gaze to Jericho. Is it about Mr. Petrov? I saw his name in the news. It's so tragic. Did you know him well? The effect was instantaneous. Jericho's face went white. He stared at her, his eyes wide with a new, terrifying thought. How did she know that name? He'd never mentioned it to her. The news, she added quickly, as if sensing his panic. It was in the Financial Times. They said he was a partner in the Nakatomi venture. I thought it might be related to your stress. She made herself look smaller, more fragile. I'm sorry, I shouldn't have pried. It was a masterful stroke. She had given him the answer, but the seed of doubt was planted. Victoria stared at her, her lips curled into a snarl. She saw it not as a lucky guess, but as a pathetic attempt to seem relevant. Oh, so now you're reading the Financial Times? Victoria mocked. What's next? A subscription to The Economist? Don't pretend you understand their world, little girl. You're nothing but a pretty decoration. Jericho, however, was still rattled. He looked at Estelle, truly looked at her, for the first time in a long time. He saw the frail woman, the trembling hands, the downcast eyes. It couldn't be. The idea was absurd. It was just a coincidence. He forced a harsh laugh. Of course, the news. He grabbed Victoria's arm. Come on, I need a real drink. I'm tired of this mausoleum. They left, leaving Estelle alone once more. The mask stayed in place until the elevator doors closed. Then the corner of her mouth twitched. She had just tested the waters, and the result was perfect. He was spooked. His paranoia, now festering, would make him sloppy. And when he was sloppy, he would make mistakes. She knew Jericho's greatest weakness wasn't his cruelty or his criminality. It was his ego. He could not fathom that someone he considered so profoundly beneath him could ever be a threat. He was looking for dragons in the boardroom, never suspecting the viper coiled at his own hearth. And that was exactly where the Nightingale wanted him to be looking. The plan was to dismantle his empire from the inside out. But Faye knew that to do that, she needed to first amplify the chaos. She needed to make Jericho feel like he was losing his mind, to turn his own home into a house of psychological horrors. She started small. A file moved on his desk, a book slightly out of place on his shelf, the temperature in his office inexplicably dropping a few degrees. They were tiny, insignificant things, easily dismissed as oversights or glitches, but they began to accumulate, a steady drip, drip, drip on his already frayed nerves. He would storm out of his office, convinced his cleaning staff had been snooping. "Who touched my desk?" he would roar, his voice echoing in the vast apartment. The staff, terrified, would swear they hadn't. He would check the security logs, which, thanks to Faye's expert slicing, showed nothing. Then she escalated. She started using her knowledge from the bug. Jericho would have a confidential phone call about a potential business vulnerability, and the next morning, an anonymous tip would be sent to a financial blogger from a disposable email address. The information was never direct enough to be traced back, but it was specific enough to cause damage, to spook investors, to force Jericho into frantic damage control. His paranoia began to consume him. He started suspecting everyone, his partners, his board members, his lawyers. He put a new bug-sweeping team on retainer, a high-tech crew who came in once a week. They never found anything. Faye's devices were military-grade, designed to be undetectable by commercial equipment. The cleaners she hired were, in fact, her own people, former assets she could trust, who helped her manage her subtle campaign of gaslighting. Victoria, meanwhile, was growing increasingly impatient with his obsession. "You're losing it, Jericho," she told him one night, her voice sharp. They were in the living room. Faye was supposedly asleep, but she was listening to every word from the next room. "You're so consumed with these ghosts that you're letting the business suffer. The board is talking. They think you're becoming unstable. Don't you see? It's all connected," he insisted, his eyes wild. "Petrov, the leaks, the things moving in my own office. Someone is playing a game with me. Or maybe you're just cracking under the pressure," she retorted coldly. "Maybe you're not the man I thought you were." The barb hit its mark. Jericho's ego, his most vulnerable point, was wounded. "How dare you?" he seethed. "I built this city. I built you." "You built nothing but a house of cards," she shot back, "and it's starting to wobble." This was the moment Faye had been waiting for, the moment their toxic alliance began to fracture. It was time for the centerpiece of her psychological attack. It was time to give Jericho a real ghost to be afraid of. The next evening, Jericho was working late in his office. Victoria was out at some social event, eager for a respite from his dark moods. Estelle had retired to her room early, complaining of a migraine. The apartment was silent. Faye, dressed in all black, moved like a shadow. She went to the master control panel for the apartment's complex smart home system, a panel hidden behind a modern art installation in the hallway. She had sliced into it months ago. In his office, Jericho was staring at stock tickers, a scowl on his face. Suddenly the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness, save for the glow of his computer monitors. "Damn it," he muttered, reaching for his phone to call building maintenance. Before he could dial, a soft sound drifted from the living room. Music, a slow, haunting melody from a piano. Jericho froze. His blood ran cold. The piano was a self-playing model, but it was programmed to play upbeat jazz, not this funeral dirge. He stood up slowly, his heart hammering in his chest. "Who's there?" he called out, his voice trembling slightly. Silence. The music stopped. He grabbed a heavy glass paperweight from his desk, his hands slick with sweat. He crept out of his office and into the vast, dark living room. The floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the glittering city lights, but they offered no comfort. They only made the shadows in the room seem deeper, darker. The piano was silent. No one was there. He let out a shaky breath. It must have been a system glitch, a power surge. His nerves were shot. He was imagining things. Then he saw her. For a split second, a figure stood at the far end of the room, silhouetted against the window. It was a woman in a pale, shimmering dress, a silver dress, just like the one Estelle had worn to the gala. "Estelle," he whispered, his voice cracking. The figure turned its head, and for a terrifying instant, he thought he saw her face, pale, tragic, and streaked with what looked like tears of blood. He cried out, stumbling backward, dropping the paperweight. It shattered on the marble floor. He squeezed his eyes shut, and when he opened them again, she was gone. The lights flickered back on. The room was empty. The paperweight lay in pieces on the floor. It was impossible. It had to be a hallucination, a stress-induced waking nightmare. But it had felt so real. What he didn't know was that Faye was a master of more than just combat and espionage. She was a master of psychological warfare. The ghost was a high-resolution projection, a technology she had acquired from her past life, deployed from a tiny, hidden device. The music was channeled through the Sonos system. The entire event had lasted less than 10 seconds, but it was enough. Jericho scrambled for his phone and called Victoria. "She was here," he babbled, his voice hysterical. "A ghost in our apartment." "Jericho, stop it!" Victoria's voice was cold, furious. "I'm at a charity dinner. You cannot call me with this nonsense. Pull yourself together, or so help me God, I will walk away from you and this entire mess." The line went dead. Jericho stood alone in his magnificent, empty apartment, trembling. For the first time, the fear he felt wasn't about business or money. It was a primal, superstitious terror. He was being haunted. He didn't know by whom or what, but he was starting to believe that some sins, some betrayals, follow you from beyond the grave. In her room, Faye dismantled the projector. Her face was calm, her hands steady. She had not laid a single hand on him, yet she had struck a deeper blow than any physical assault. She had cracked the foundation of his sanity. And a man who cannot trust his own mind is a man who is already defeated. He just doesn't know it yet. Jericho's haunting was the tipping point. His paranoia curdled into a full-blown obsession. He became a recluse in his own home, jumping at shadows, his days a frantic cycle of reviewing security footage and drinking himself into a stupor. His nights were sleepless, spent waiting for the ghostly woman in the silver dress to reappear. She never did, which only made it worse. The anticipation was its own form of torture. Victoria, seeing her meal ticket and social standing circling the drain, changed tactics. Her contempt for Jericho's weakness was now overshadowed by a desperate need to regain control. If he couldn't run the empire, she would. She began making calls, scheduling meetings behind his back, positioning herself as the stable, rational successor to the increasingly erratic Jericho Slade. Faye watched all of this, a silent puppet master pulling the strings. The bug in Jericho's office was now her window into Victoria's nascent coup. She listened as Victoria spoke to board members, her voice dripping with concern. "I'm worried about him," she'd say. "He's not sleeping. He's talking about apparitions. The pressure is getting to him. The company needs a steady hand right now." It was time for Faye to accelerate the company's demise. She began her whisper campaign. Using encrypted channels and burner phones, she started feeding carefully selected information to a notoriously aggressive financial journalist, a man named Ben Carter, known for his ability to smell blood in the water from miles away. The first leak was about the Nakatomi deal. She didn't reveal the money laundering, not yet. She started with something simpler, something that would raise questions about Jericho's judgment. She leaked the fact that Roman Petrov was under unofficial investigation by Interpol at the time of the deal, a fact Jericho had known and willfully ignored. Ben Carter's column was explosive. "Slade Global's billion-dollar handshake with the Russian mob?" the headline screamed. The article was filled with innuendo and carefully worded questions, all pointing to Jericho's recklessness. Slade Global's stock shuddered, dipping a few points. Jericho, when he saw the article, flew into a rage. "Victoria!" he bellowed, storming into the living room where she was on the phone, no doubt with another board member. He threw the tablet down on the coffee table. "This is your fault. You and your power plays. You're leaking things to make me look bad." "My fault!" she shrieked, jumping to her feet. "You're the one who got into bed with men like Petrov. You're the one who's seeing ghosts. I'm trying to save this company from you." Their fights became the new soundtrack of the penthouse. Vicious, loud, and increasingly public. The staff heard everything, and the staff talked. Faye's next leak to Ben Carter was more surgical. It was a series of internal emails, heavily redacted to protect her identity as the source, showing Jericho overriding his risk assessment team's warnings about a new venture in South America. The project was failing spectacularly, losing the company millions, a fact Jericho had been desperately trying to hide from the board. The new headline was brutal. King Slade's folly, leaked emails show, CEO gambled and lost millions. The stock didn't just dip this time, it plunged. Investors panicked. The board called an emergency meeting. Jericho was summoned, but he was in no state to attend. He was a disheveled, paranoid wreck, unshaven and reeking of whiskey. Victoria went in his stead. This was her moment, the one she had been planning for. She stood before the board, a picture of strength and composure. She painted a portrait of a brilliant man crumbling under stress, a tragic hero who had lost his way. She presented her solution: place Jericho on an indefinite medical leave and appoint her as interim CEO. "I can stabilize the ship," she argued, her voice resonating with confidence. "I know his vision, but I do not share his current instability. I can restore investor confidence." Faye listened to the meeting via the bug she'd planted on Victoria's phone. She had to admire the woman's audacity. She was a piranha, and she was stripping Jericho's legacy from his bones while he was still alive. The board, desperate to stop the bleeding, agreed. Jericho was officially sidelined. Victoria Devereaux, his mistress, was now in control of his billion-dollar empire. When Victoria returned to the penthouse that evening, she found Jericho sitting in the dark, a bottle of vodka on the table beside him. "They did it," he slurred, looking up at her. "They pushed me out." "It's for your own good, Jules," she said, her voice devoid of any real sympathy. It was the voice of a victor. "You need to rest. Get better." "You did this," he whispered, his voice cracking with a broken, dawning realization. "This was you. All of it." "I did what was necessary," she replied coolly, walking to the bar to pour herself a celebratory glass of champagne. "I saved the company. Your company." She took a sip, her eyes gleaming over the rim of the glass. "Or rather, my company, now." The look on his face was a portrait of utter devastation. He had been betrayed, not by a ghost or a business rival, but by the one person he thought was his partner in crime. The irony was devastating. From the doorway of her bedroom, Estelle watched them, a silent observer to the carnage she had orchestrated. She looked pale and frail, leaning against the doorframe as if for support. "What's happened?" she asked, her voice a fragile whisper. Victoria turned, a triumphant sneer on her face. "Your husband has taken a much-needed vacation. I'm in charge now." She looked Estelle up and down with utter disdain. "Things are going to be different around here. I'm redecorating, starting with getting rid of all the dead weight." The threat was unmistakable. Estelle's protection, as flimsy as it had been, was gone. Jericho was no longer the master of the house. A new queen had been crowned, and she had no use for the sickly, inconvenient wife of her predecessor. Estelle simply nodded, her eyes downcast, and retreated into her room. Victoria laughed, a sharp, ugly sound that echoed in the cavernous apartment. She thought she had won. She thought the game was over. She had no idea that for Faye, the real game was just beginning. She had successfully isolated her targets from each other. She had dismantled their power structure. Now they were vulnerable. Now they were exposed. And now the nightingale could finally stop whispering and start to sing her deadliest song. With Jericho neutered and Victoria in the CEO's chair, the penthouse transformed. The cold, sterile opulence was replaced by Victoria's gaudy, flamboyant taste. She was throwing parties, courting the media, and solidifying her grip on power. She treated Jericho like a pathetic piece of furniture and Estelle like an insect to be crushed. Her favorite new pastime was psychological torment. She would cancel Estelle's long-standing doctor's appointments without telling her, claiming the doctors were quacks, and she was saving money. She would instruct the kitchen staff to prepare foods Estelle was supposedly allergic to, then mock her for not eating. "You have to get over these childish fantasies, Estelle," she'd say at the dinner table, in front of a seething but powerless Jericho. "It's all in your head. A little gluten won't kill you." Faye played her part beautifully. She appeared flustered, frightened, and increasingly unwell. The more Victoria pushed, the more fragile she seemed. It was a dangerous dance. She was goading a predator, pushing her towards a fatal mistake. The mistake came, as Faye knew it would, from Victoria's arrogance. Victoria, in her bid to purge the company of Jericho's loyalists, had scheduled a complete system audit of Slade Global's financials. She wanted to find any hidden accounts or slush funds Jericho might have squirreled away. She had no idea what she was about to uncover. Faye knew the company's servers held the unredacted truth of the Nakatomi deal. The real truth. Not just that Petrov was under investigation, but that the entire venture was a front for a massive international money laundering ring. And buried even deeper in the encrypted subfolders was the real prize, the ledger. A detailed account of every illegal transaction, every bribe, every dirty dollar that had passed through Slade Global. It was Jericho's insurance policy, and Victoria was about to trip over it. Faye could have erased the files. It would have been simple, but that wasn't the plan. The plan wasn't just to escape. The plan was to burn it all to the ground. The auditors found it on a Tuesday. The call from the lead auditor to Victoria was frantic. Faye listened in, her expression serene. "Ms. Devereaux," the man stammered, "we have a problem, a significant problem. We've uncovered encrypted ledgers. The numbers are... This isn't just creative accounting. This is racketeering. This is federal prison-level crime." Victoria's blood ran cold. She had been so focused on ousting Jericho that she never considered the rot might have penetrated the entire foundation. Her name was on the company now. His crimes were now her crimes. Panic set in. She called her lawyer, who gave her stark, terrifying advice. "Destroy it. Destroy it all. If the FBI gets this, you're finished." That evening, Victoria came home in a state of barely controlled hysteria. She found Jericho in the study, staring blankly at a television screen. "You!" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You fool! You didn't just build a company, you built a criminal enterprise. The auditors found the ledgers." Jericho looked at her, a flicker of his old cruel amusement in his eyes. "My ledgers? Oh dear, that is a problem, isn't it? And with your signature on everything now, it looks like it's your problem." He seemed to relish her terror. Misery loved company. "We have to destroy the servers," she said, pacing furiously. "Tonight, before the auditors file their official report." "And how do you plan to do that?" he scoffed. "Walk into the most secure data center in Manhattan with a hammer?" "No," she said, her eyes landing on Estelle, who had just entered the room with a tray of tea, the picture of domestic servitude. Victoria's eyes narrowed, and a truly despicable idea began to form. "We create a diversion," Victoria said slowly, a venomous smile spreading across her face. "A tragedy, something to draw all the attention away, to give us time to wipe the data." She looked directly at Estelle. "A terrible, tragic accident." Jericho stared at her, his drunken brain slowly processing her meaning. "What are you saying?" Victoria walked over to Estelle, who stood frozen, holding the tea tray. Victoria reached out and caressed Estelle's cheek, a gesture of mock affection that was terrifying in its insincerity. "Poor, sick Estelle," Victoria cooed. "Her illness has been so hard on her. She's so confused, so depressed." She looked back at Jericho. A desperate, heartbroken wife. A tragic overdose. It would be so sad. So distracting. The air in the room grew thick and cold. Jericho looked from his calculating mistress to his terrified-looking wife. He had abused Estelle, tormented her, but this was a new level of evil. And yet, He was trapped. The ledgers would destroy him as surely as they would destroy Victoria. Faye's heart was beating a steady, lethal rhythm. This is it, the moment she had been working towards. They were finally going to cross the line from which there was no return. Estelle, her hands trembling, dropped the tea tray. It crashed to the floor, shattering the porcelain cups. "No," she whispered, her eyes wide with perfectly feigned terror. "Please." "It's the only way, Jericho," Victoria said, her voice a hard, sharp whisper. "It's her or us." Jericho stood up, his face a mask of conflict. He looked at Estelle, cowering on the floor amidst the broken china, the very picture of a helpless victim. He had long since stopped seeing her as a person. She was a thing, a possession, a problem, and Victoria was offering a final solution. He gave a slow, deliberate nod. "Do it." That night they came for her. They thought she was asleep. Victoria had crushed a lethal dose of sleeping pills into a glass of water and forced Estelle to drink it earlier, holding her down while Jericho watched, his face ashen. They had carried her to her bed and left her to die. Now, hours later, they returned to the room to ensure the job was done. Victoria had a syringe in her hand, filled with an air bubble, a final, untraceable way to stop a heart if the pills hadn't worked. They opened the door to her bedroom. It was dark. The only sound was the hum of the city outside. "Is she?" Victoria whispered. Jericho reached for the light switch. "Don't," a voice said from the darkness. It was not Estelle's voice. This voice was not soft or frail. It was cold, clear, and resonant with absolute authority. It was the voice of Faye. Jericho and Victoria froze, their hearts seizing in their chests. "Who's there?" Jericho stammered. The light from the hallway silhouetted a figure sitting calmly in an armchair in the corner of the room. It was Estelle's body, but the posture was all wrong. She wasn't slumped or sick. She was sitting upright, her hands resting calmly on the armrests, like a queen on a throne. "You came to see if I was dead," the voice continued, devoid of any emotion. "The answer is no." She rose from the chair, moving with a fluid, predatory grace that was utterly alien. She stepped out of the shadows and into the dim light. Her eyes, no longer downcast or vacant, were glowing with a terrifying intensity. She looked from the syringe in Victoria's hand to the fear on Jericho's face. "The pills were a nice touch," she said, her voice dangerously calm. "A bit amateur, but I appreciate the effort." She took a step closer. "My turn." Victoria, snapping out of her shock, shrieked and lunged, aiming the syringe at Faye's heart. What happened next was too fast for Jericho's terrified mind to process. Faye's arm shot out, not to block, but to redirect. She caught Victoria's wrist, twisted it with an audible snap, and used her momentum to slam her into the wall. Victoria screamed, a sound of pure agony as the bone in her arm broke. The syringe flew from her grasp. Faye caught it. She turned to Jericho, who was paralyzed with a terror so profound it had stolen the air from his lungs. He was staring at his wife, but it wasn't his wife. This was a stranger, a monster. "Who? What are you?" he breathed. Faye smiled, but it was a terrifying sight, all teeth and no warmth. It was the smile of a predator that knows the hunt is finally over. "My name," she said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper, "is Faye, and you should have let me sleep." And there, in the wreckage of their own making, Jericho and Victoria finally understood the truth. They weren't dealing with a sick, fragile woman. They had been living with a sleeping tiger. The rest of their story is one of precise, calculated revenge, where every asset was stripped, every secret exposed, and every last shred of their power was systematically annihilated by the ghost they created. It's a chilling reminder that the people we underestimate are often the most dangerous of all. If this story of deception and revenge sent a chill down your spine, make sure you hit that like button and share it with someone who loves a good twist. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring the notification bell so you never miss another story about the dark secrets hidden beneath the surface of our world. We have more tales of betrayal and justice coming your way.
They say betrayal cuts deepest when it comes from the one you love most. Imagine standing on a cold street at midnight. Your husband's mansion lights fading behind you as he slams the door, turning your world upside down when you're pregnant with his child. In that single moment, you vow never to be helpless again. This is the story of Sarah Dalton Harrington, a woman thrown away like a disposable trinket, but fate doesn't forget. Years later, she returns stronger than ever, armed with ambition and a burning need for justice to buy the very company that made her ex-husband wildly rich. The clock read 11:47 p.m. on a cold December evening in Chicago as Sarah Dalton Harrington sat by the bay window in her living room, gently caressing her swelling belly. Her soft dark hair fell over weary eyes. She was exhausted not just from her pregnancy, but from the palpable tension that filled the house. Her husband, Ethan Harrington, was pacing in the hallway, phone pressed to his ear, his tone urgent and clipped. This was supposed to be their dream home, an elegant brownstone-style mansion overlooking a frozen Lake Michigan. They'd moved there a few months earlier, convinced that Ethan's budding business success would only continue to climb. Ethan, with his chiseled features, impeccable suits, and fiercely ambitious spirit, had always promised Sarah the world. Yet lately, the atmosphere had turned grim. The man who had once serenaded her with weekend getaways in Napa Valley and stolen kisses in the moonlight now barely offered a kind word. Sarah tried to ignore the growing knot of dread in her stomach. They'd been arguing for months over finances, his perpetual business trips, and most painfully his growing coldness toward her. She sensed something shifting in him after he secured a round of angel investment from a well-known Texas billionaire who had once pitched on Shark Tank, the famed Mark Cuban. Ethan's startup, Innova Spark, was on the verge of explosive growth, and with it came new faces, new women, and new pressures that seemed to erode the foundation of their relationship. Ethan hung up the phone abruptly and stormed into the living room. His expression was hard, his normally warm hazel eyes now distant. "Did I just hear you talking to my accountant earlier today?" he demanded. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. I just asked him about the medical insurance details. With the baby coming, we need to be sure. "No," Ethan snapped, cutting her off. "We don't need anything. You don't get to interfere in my business. You're not exactly a partner in Innova Spark. You're just my wife." Can you understand? That Sarah swallowed hard tears, pricking at the corners of her eyes. This was not the man she'd fallen in love with. She had supported him through endless nights of building prototypes in their cramped apartment, skipping luxuries so they could invest in his dreams. She'd believed that once his idea took off, things would get better. But his success had become the wedge pushing them apart. "Ethan." She began trying to sound calm. "I'm only looking out for our family. In about 3 months, we'll have a newborn. We need stability, not these random blow-ups and uncertain finances. You're spending more than you're making, and I'm worried." He scoffed, stepping closer, anger rolling off him in waves. "Stability. The only person destabilizing everything around here is you. Your constant nagging, your insecurities, your inability to just let me run my business in peace." Her mind flicked to the extravagant parties he'd started hosting, a swirling crowd of well-dressed tech investors, local celebrities and socialites who flitted in and out of their home. She rarely recognized any of them, and it was clear they looked at her like an outsider in her own house. She mustered every ounce of courage she had left. "If you truly believe that maybe we need help counseling a mediator something, this isn't just about us anymore, Ethan." He let out a harsh laugh. "Counseling. You think I have time for counseling when Innova Spark is on the brink of sealing a multi-million-dollar deal? I don't need dead weight right now." Sarah felt a rush of cold fear as he used that phrase. dead weight to describe her. She pressed a hand protectively over her belly. How could he talk like this? They were about to become parents. Ethan shook his head. I've tolerated your meddling for too long. Your constant questions, your distrust, your talk about me, wasting money. It's too much. This is my moment, Sarah. I won't let you ruin it. Time seemed to slow as he took a step back, scanned her from head to toe with contempt, and said the words that would forever echo in her mind. You need to go, he said, voice trembling with a cocktail of fury and arrogance. Get out of my house, she blinked. What I said, get out, tonight. Ethan, it's midnight. I'm pregnant. The words stumbled out of her mouth, heavy with disbelief and terror. He stalked to the closet and yanked out her winter coat, thrusting it at her. Take your stuff and go. You can stay in some hotel or whatever. I don't care. But you're not staying here. Sarah's lips parted in shock. She struggled to find an argument, a plea, any thread of sanity to hold on to. Her legs felt weak, her stomach in knots, tears freely streaming down her cheeks. He was serious. Please, Ethan, this is our child we're talking about. You can't just throw me onto the streets. He didn't respond. Instead, he grabbed her suitcase from the hallway, shoved it at her feet, and glared. In a daze, Sarah realized she had no choice. She glanced around the living room. She had so carefully decorated photos of their wedding in Santorini, perched on the mantel, the couch where they'd once cuddled after a tough day, the echo of laughter they used to share. All of it had disintegrated into an unrecognizable wreck, spearheaded by the man she no longer knew. Struggling to catch her breath, Sarah donned her coat. She rummaged in her purse for her phone, her fingers trembling as she dialed her friend's number. Izzy, she whispered when the call connected, voice quivering. Can you come get me, please? I'm out on the sidewalk. Isabella. Izzy Rodriguez, her closest friend since high school, responded in startled concern. At this hour, Sarah, what's going on? Sarah swallowed back sobs. I'll explain later. Please, just hurry. She glanced up at Ethan one last time, hoping for a flicker of remorse of the man who had once loved her. But his face was a stone mask, eyes hard and unyielding. Without another word, she stepped into the winter night, Chicago's icy wind biting at her cheeks, tears freezing as they fell. He slammed the door behind her. The echo of that slam felt like a judge's gavel, final and damning. Sarah stood there alone on the doorstep of what had once been her home. Less than a minute later, the lock turned. She stared at the closed door, half expecting him to fling it open, rush out and apologize. But it never happened. Lights dimmed inside, as though the house itself was done with her. Hugging her coat tighter, she carefully made her way down the front steps, the small suitcase rattling behind her. In her womb, she felt a flutter her unborn child, as if sensing her turmoil. On the curb, she waited, teeth chattering from cold and shock. The streets were eerily quiet, only the soft hum of distant traffic and the glow of streetlights to bear witness to her heartbreak. Minutes later, Izzy's car pulled up, headlights piercing the darkness. The friend's eyes were wild with concern as she jumped out and wrapped Sarah in a hug. I'm here, Izzy murmured, guiding Sarah into the passenger seat. I'm here for you. The moment she settled into the car, Sarah allowed herself one final backward glance at the mansion she had believed would be the setting for her happily ever after. The windows reflected the frosty moonlight, offering no welcome. A wave of nausea and heartbreak crashed over her. She inhaled deeply, placed both hands on her belly, and made a silent promise to the child inside. No matter what happened, she would fight for their future, find a way to give them the life they deserved. Ethan Harrington might have cast her aside in his pursuit of fame and fortune, but she would not disappear quietly. Life had a strange way of turning tables, and though she couldn't see it now, the seeds of her remarkable comeback were already planted. The neon vacancy sign flickered overhead, casting an unsteady glow on the sidewalk. It was 1:30 a.m. by the time Izzy drove Sarah to a nearby motel. They both knew it wasn't the safest place in Chicago, but in the dead of night with snow drifting through the air, it felt like the only option. Sarah's eyes were raw from crying, her voice hoarse from recounting Ethan's final cruel words. Izzy pulled into a parking spot outside the modest single-story building. She turned off the engine and rested a gentle hand on Sarah's shoulder. "You're staying with me after tonight," she declared. "No friend of mine is going to be living in a dump like this." Sarah managed a wan smile. "I appreciate that. But let's just get through tonight. I'm not even sure how to think right now." They walked to the reception window, where a tired-looking clerk accepted Sarah's credit card. She silently thanked the heavens that it hadn't been shut down. Her heart sank at the meager balance she knew remained. She'd spent much of her savings on Ethan's grandiose illusions, fancy dinners, the move to the mansion, and supporting his business whenever he needed an extra infusion of cash. Room key in hand, the two women entered the small, dimly lit space. A single bed, a scuffed wooden table, and a worn armchair filled the cramped quarters. The walls, painted a dull beige, exuded an air of desolation. Sarah sank onto the bed. Izzy perched next to her, rubbing Sarah's back in circles. "You are not alone," she said firmly. "I'm sorry I couldn't get to you sooner." Sarah shook her head, tears threatening to spill again. He changed Izzy. Ever since Innova Spark started attracting investors, it's like I don't even know him anymore. It's not just the money, it's the power, the freedom to do anything. The more successful he got, the more I felt him slipping away. Izzy's face hardened. "It's disgusting what he did. Throwing you out at night when you're carrying his child. He'll regret it someday." A moment of heavy silence followed. "If only I had somewhere else to go," Sarah whispered. "I never thought I'd be in this position. That's what friends are for. Tomorrow you're moving in with me. For as long as you need." "Got it?" Sarah nodded, relief loosening her chest for the first time that night. "Thank you," she whispered. "I'll pay you back." "Don't even go there," Izzy replied, shaking her head. "You just focus on taking care of yourself and your baby." By dawn, Izzy guided Sarah to her compact one-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of the city. It was no mansion, but it was safe and warm. After depositing Sarah's suitcase, they settled on the couch, letting silence stretch between them like a fragile thread. "It's yours," Izzy said, softly. "The couch pulls out into a bed. I'll manage the rest." "Just rest, all right?" With exhaustion dragging her eyelids down. Sarah mumbled her gratitude before surrendering to sleep. When she awoke hours later, daylight streamed through the blinds, painting stripes on the living room carpet. She could hear the clatter of pans in the kitchen. "How about some scrambled eggs?" Izzy called. Sarah tried to smile, though her face felt stiff. "Sure," she croaked, forcing herself to stand. The cold light of day brought new anxieties. She placed a hand on her belly, feeling a soft flutter. The sensation reminded her of how much responsibility she now carried, and how alone she truly was in it. While they ate breakfast, Izzy opened her laptop. "You need to find a lawyer," she said, "just to see what your options are. He can't just throw you out and leave you with nothing." Sarah gave a shaky nod. "I can't afford a big-name lawyer," she admitted. "And Ethan, he'll have the best money can buy." Izzy set her fork down with a clink. "I have a cousin who handles family law. She's not high profile, but she's good. Let me call her. If she can't take your case, maybe she can refer you to someone who does pro bono work." Gratitude welled up inside Sarah. "Thank you," she said, voice cracking. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Iz." "Let's not find out," Izzy quipped, though her eyes were full of empathy. The days that followed were a whirlwind of legal consultations, awkward phone calls with Ethan's accountants, who refused to disclose anything without his permission, and dealing with the emotional fallout. Sarah repeatedly tried to contact Ethan. Each call went straight to voicemail. Each text remained unanswered. She felt a numb ache in her chest, mingled with simmering anger. How could the man she once adored vanish so thoroughly from her life? Despite the heartbreak, Sarah realized wallowing in despair wouldn't feed her or her unborn child. She needed a plan. She needed to stand on her own 2 feet. One Friday afternoon, she found herself walking into a battered women's resource center. The building was a simple brick structure, but inside it bustled with activity. Women talking in hushed tones, kids running around, volunteers stacking pamphlets. Sarah felt out of place among them. After all, she'd always been the supportive wife of an ambitious entrepreneur, but if life had taught her anything over the last week, it was how swiftly circumstances could change. A kind volunteer approached her. "Is this your first time here?" Sarah nodded, swallowing her pride. I need help. My husband threw me out. I'm pregnant, and I don't have a job right now." Without judgment, the volunteer guided her to an intake desk and helped her fill out forms for assistance programs. They gave her information about prenatal care clinics, job listings, and local charities offering temporary support. It wasn't glamorous, but it was a start. One crisp February morning, while sipping tea with Izzy in the apartment, Sarah found an odd sense of clarity, as if she'd slept long enough in the darkness and was ready to face the day. She remembered the dreams she once had, starting her own business, maybe a consulting firm. Years ago, she had studied business administration at Northwestern University, but put her ambitions on hold to support Ethan's startup dream. She opened her laptop, breathed in the scent of possibility, and began searching for online courses. If she could update her skill set, especially in digital marketing or project management, perhaps she'd land a decent job before the baby arrived. Her eyes flicked to an ad for a Women in Tech scholarship, sponsored by Oprah Winfrey's Foundation. Intrigued, she clicked the link. The program promised a fully funded 6-month course in entrepreneurship for women who faced adversity. A million doubts crowded her mind, but one resolute thought pushed them aside. She had nothing to lose by applying. Gathering her transcripts and old recommendation letters, Sarah poured her soul into the application essay. She wrote of resilience of heartbreak, turned into fuel for growth of an unborn child who depended on her unwavering strength. When she hit the submit button, her heart pounded. She glanced at her phone background, a wedding photo of her and Ethan, which she hadn't changed yet. A spark of anger tinged her heartbreak, igniting determination. "Time to rewrite my story," she murmured, turning off the phone screen. Meanwhile, across town, Ethan Harrington was busy entertaining potential investors in Innova Spark's brand-new office tower. He strode through glass-walled conference rooms with a cocksure swagger, discussing the next big pitch. The venture had ballooned beyond his wildest dreams after Mark Cuban took an interest in the proprietary software that predicted e-commerce trends. Ethan's phone buzzed, and he glanced at the screen, Sarah. He grimaced and sent it to voicemail. He had severed ties with her the moment he realized her worries might slow him down. To him, Sarah represented old baggage and needless constraints. The top-tier lawyers he'd hired assured him that while there would be some financial obligations due to her pregnancy, he could keep everything else. What was a monthly check or two in the grand scheme of his unstoppable ascent, yet late at night in his penthouse suite, a lavish place perched high above the city, Ethan sometimes felt a pang of something. Not quite regret, more like unease. He'd stare at the Chicago skyline, illuminated by countless lights, thinking about the child that would soon enter the world without him. He shook his head, rationalizing that he was doing what he had to do. The baby would be provided for financially. As for Sarah, she had chosen to cross him with her incessant nagging and doubt as far as he was concerned. This was business, and business was about winning. 2 weeks after submitting her scholarship application, Sarah was cleaning dishes in Izzy's kitchen when her phone rang. She almost didn't recognize the unknown number. Hello. This is Marie Thompson from the Oprah Winfrey Leadership Foundation. May I speak with Ms. Sarah Harrington? Sarah's heart skipped. This is she. I'm pleased to inform you that you've been selected for our Women in Tech Scholarship program. We reviewed hundreds of applications, and your story stood out. Sarah's hand flew to her mouth, muffling a half-choked sob of relief. She managed a shaky, "Thank you. Thank you so much." The woman explained the details. Sarah would receive a stipend, online mentorship, and if she proved her capabilities, potential seed funding for a startup idea. Sarah's entire being flooded with gratitude and renewed hope. Here was a chance at independence, stability, and a new beginning. When she ended the call, Izzy emerged from the bedroom. "What's going on?" Sarah's face glowed with tears of joy. She relayed the news voice, trembling with excitement. Izzy squealed and pulled her into a tight hug. "Girl, I knew you'd do great things. This is your shot, a real fresh start." And so a door had opened when all others seemed slammed shut in her face. Sarah's resolve crystallized. She would use this program not only to survive, but to build a life that no one could ever take from her again. By the end of that day, as snow fell gently outside, Sarah curled up on Izzy's couch laptop, open, reviewing the welcome packet from the foundation. Her hand rested lightly on her unborn child, feeling small movements inside. She whispered, "I promise, little one, I'll make this work. For both of us." Spring arrived in Chicago with a shy warmth, thawing the icy streets and awakening the city to new possibilities. For Sarah, it marked the start of her scholarship program. The Oprah Winfrey Leadership Foundation had partnered with Northwestern University's Entrepreneurship Hub, so Sarah, by a twist of fate, would find herself back on a campus she once knew intimately. On her first day of orientation, Sarah felt both nervous and exhilarated. She carefully dressed in a loose-fitting blouse to accommodate her growing belly and a pair of maternity slacks. The mirror revealed a woman whose features had sharpened with resolve. Though her personal life was in tatters, this course felt like a beacon in the darkness. Inside a sleek, modern conference hall, about 24 other women mingled some young prodigies, others older professionals pivoting in their careers. They all seemed united by a quiet determination. a spark in their eyes that said, "We are ready to change our lives." A distinguished woman with a clipboard introduced herself as Dr. Leah McKnight, the program director. "Welcome, everyone," Dr. McKnight began. "Each of you has shown extraordinary resilience and talent. Our goal is to nurture that spark, provide resources, and watch you flourish. This is a safe space to share ideas, collaborate, and dream big." While Sarah settled into her new routine, Ethan Harrington's fortune soared. InnovaSpark had just announced a partnership with a major Silicon Valley firm. The news made headlines in tech magazines with Ethan front and center, hailed as a visionary. Billionaires like Bill Gates and Jeff Bezos were rumored to be aware of InnovaSpark's success story, though no direct collaboration had been confirmed. In short, Ethan was living the high-life helicopter rides, private dinners with venture capitalists, and board meetings in the poshest locales. It was during one such board meeting that Ethan had a brush with humility he didn't expect. Sequoia Capital's lead partner, a sober-faced woman named Margaret Chen, leveled him with a critical question about the company's future direction. "InnovaSpark is expanding rapidly. Mr. Harrington," she said, adjusting her glasses, "but I'm concerned about brand consolidation. Who exactly is your target market now? And how will you maintain consistent revenue streams without diluting the original technology?" Ethan blinked. "We'll pivot if necessary. That's the beauty of being agile." She raised an eyebrow. "Agility is one thing, but without a clear strategic plan, you risk losing credibility. I hear the staff turnover has been high lately. Do you have a plan to address employee satisfaction?" Heat rose in his cheeks. He was used to breezing through these interactions with charm and bravado. But Margaret Chen didn't appear swayed by surface-level confidence. "We're hiring top talent from across the country," he replied stiffly, "and we have a robust benefits package in place." Unconvinced, she simply nodded, made a note on her tablet, and moved on. But Ethan sensed a crack. For the first time, he realized that being a flashy founder wasn't enough to secure unwavering investor faith. He'd need to tighten the ship if he wanted to keep it sailing forward. Back at Northwestern's Entrepreneurship Center, Sarah immersed herself in lectures, team projects, and mentorship sessions. She marveled at how the business world had evolved since she last studied. Concepts like AI integration, growth hacking, and sustainable venture funding now dominated discussions. As she took meticulous notes, she felt the baby kick a gentle reminder that she was no longer alone in this journey. One afternoon, Dr. McKnight introduced the class to a special guest speaker, Oprah Winfrey herself visiting to inspire the newly minted scholarship recipients. Sarah nearly trembled with excitement when Oprah walked on stage, radiating warmth and confidence. "It's easy to feel alone in your struggles," Oprah said, her voice resonating through the room. "But remember, your pain can be turned into power. Every setback is an opportunity for a comeback." Sarah fought back tears. She thought about the night Ethan threw her out, the humiliation and despair. And yet here she was, forging a new path with a supportive community around her. By the end of Oprah's talk, Sarah felt something in her chest lift, replaced by a fierce determination to succeed not just for herself, but for the unborn child who would soon enter her life. A few weeks into the program, Sarah attended a networking event co-sponsored by the Kellogg School of Management. Clutching a small folder of her sketches and concepts, she tried to mingle, though her growing bump meant she couldn't move as swiftly through the crowded hall. She eventually found herself chatting with Jonathan Friedman, a seasoned venture capitalist known for spotting early-stage winners. "You're working on a startup idea," he asked, noticing her folder. She hesitated, then opened it. It's in the ideation stage. I want to create a platform that connects small e-commerce businesses to AI-driven market forecasts, kind of a simplified, more accessible version of what big corporations use. I'm calling it Embermark for now. Jonathan flipped through her sketches and mock-ups. Impressive. Reminds me a bit of InnovaSpark, but more user-friendly, less corporate. At the mention of InnovaSpark, Sarah's stomach twisted. Fate has a twisted sense of humor, she thought. She forced a smile. Yes, I was inspired by some of the tech disruptors in the space. Jonathan nodded. The difference is you're focusing on smaller retailers, correct? That's a huge market segment, often ignored by larger analytics firms. Sarah brightened. Exactly. Most mom-and-pop shops can't afford advanced predictive analytics. But if we can harness AI in a straightforward, subscription-based model, it could revolutionize how they compete. He gave her a measured look. When do you plan to launch? Sarah sighed. I'm still in the research stage. Also, my baby is due soon, so I might have to juggle motherhood and entrepreneurship. Jonathan smiled kindly. That's challenging, but not impossible. I've known several founders who started their businesses while raising children. If you're interested, I'd be happy to connect you with some angel investors who believe in supporting women-led ventures. Hope flared in her chest. That would be amazing, she said, her voice trembling with gratitude. Jonathan pulled out a business card. Send me an email. Let's set something up. As he walked away, Sarah glanced down at the card, heart racing. This could be the lifeline she needed, funding connections and validation that her idea had merit. A part of her also felt uneasy about the mention of InnovaSpark. She wondered how close Jonathan was to Ethan, but she quickly pushed the thought aside. She had learned the hard way that dwelling on the past only clouded her future. While Sarah's star seemed to be rising, Ethan was dealing with unforeseen complications. In the hush of his corner office, he stared at a spiraling spreadsheet. The board demanded swift growth, but the team was exhausted. Projects were delayed, investor pressure was mounting, and employee morale was dropping. The once lavish perks he offered, like gourmet lunches and weekend retreats, no longer sufficed to mask the stress. Late one evening, he found himself alone scanning through social media. He came across a photo of an old friend from college hosting a baby shower for his wife. With a pang, Ethan realized how out of touch he was with simpler joys. He quickly dismissed the feeling. Those joys wouldn't make me millions. Yet the twinge of something, call it guilt or regret, lingered. Meanwhile, on the other side of the city, Sarah pored over her Embermark project, emailing Jonathan Friedman a refined pitch deck. Each slide was carefully crafted, highlighting market opportunities and revenue projections. She was exhausted, but couldn't let up. The baby's kicks became her metronome, reminding her of the stakes. She worked through Braxton Hicks contractions, through swirling emotions of betrayal and fear. Always the vision of a stable future fueled her. As fate would have it, a month later, Sarah's plan to pitch Embermark to Jonathan's network was scheduled on the same day as InnovaSpark's big product demo for major investors. While Ethan showcased new features to woo potential clients, Sarah stood in a modest conference room, presenting Embermark's simpler but innovative approach to a group of angel investors. Her hands shook slightly as she clicked through slides. She detailed how Embermark would integrate AI-driven forecasts, handle inventory management, and streamline marketing strategies for small vendors. Her voice found strength the more she believed in her solution. She fielded questions about monetization, technical feasibility, and her ability to lead the venture. Each time she responded with clear-eyed determination, surprising even herself. By the end, a panel of 3 investors, including Jonathan Friedman, huddled in discussion. Then Jonathan turned to her and said, "Sarah, we see real potential here. We'd like to invest provided you're willing to bring on a co-founder with a technical background to strengthen your core platform." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she blinked them away, determined to appear professional. "I already have someone in mind," she said. "A former classmate from Northwestern who's now a software architect. We've discussed collaborating." Jonathan nodded. "Excellent. We'll draw up a term sheet. Let's start with $250,000 in seed funding, with the possibility of more once you hit milestones." Sarah thanked them profusely, her words tumbling out in a mix of disbelief and euphoria. After the handshake, she excused herself to the hallway, then promptly burst into tears, tears of vindication, of hope, of an unspoken "I told you so," aimed at the memory of Ethan's disdain. That evening she collapsed onto Izzy's couch, physically and emotionally drained. She was only a month away from her due date, but she felt an electric surge of optimism. She texted her mother, who lived out of state, sharing the good news. She even allowed herself a small, secret smile at the thought of Ethan eventually hearing about her success. Not revenge exactly, just a quiet satisfaction that she was not, in fact, dead weight. Yet as she lay there rubbing her belly, she couldn't help but feel a wave of apprehension. She had no illusions about how hard this journey would be. Balancing a newborn with a fledgling company might be the toughest challenge of her life. But she had faith in one indisputable truth. She was in control of her destiny, now forging a new life not defined by the cruelty of a husband who cast her out, but by the strength she found within. Looking at the clock, she realized it was nearly midnight, the same hour of her darkest day not so long ago. She closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you to the universe, for second chances, for unexpected allies, and for the unwavering resilience she never knew she possessed." With the seed investment secured, Sarah threw herself into building Embermark. She teamed up with Paul Nguyen, her former Northwestern classmate. A brilliant programmer with a knack for machine learning, Paul was intrigued by Sarah's idea of creating AI tools specifically geared toward small businesses. Together, they set up a cramped workspace in a shared office building near the Loop. It was a far cry from the opulence of Ethan's glass-walled Innova Spark headquarters, but it had heart and grit exactly what Sarah needed. By the time Sarah was 8 months pregnant, Embermark's prototype was taking shape. They still had numerous technical challenges, but the path forward was clearer each day. Sarah's schedule was relentless, morning calls with potential partners, afternoons tweaking marketing strategies, and evenings in front of her laptop fine-tuning business models while dealing with swollen ankles and periodic contractions. Meanwhile, Ethan found himself wrestling with Innova Spark's growing pains. The once celebrated corporate culture was cracking under the weight of deadlines and high investor expectations. Employees complained about burnout, and abrupt firings became more frequent. Ethan's top engineers threatened to quit if working conditions didn't improve. To make matters worse, rumors circulated about a potential class action lawsuit related to the stressful environment that allegedly led to mental health issues among staff. Sitting in his luxurious corner office, Ethan glanced at the city lights beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows. He was exhausted, though he'd never admit it. A tabloid headline about him flashed on his phone screen: Innova Spark CEO, in hot water over hostile work environment. He grimaced and tossed the phone aside. Ever since Sequoia Capital had hinted they might withhold a subsequent funding round, if employee attrition wasn't addressed. Ethan felt the noose tightening around his once glorified startup. One Friday evening, Sarah attended a local tech meetup where entrepreneurs networked over cocktails and hors d'oeuvres. She was tired and uncomfortable, her belly heavy, but these events were critical for building Embermark's visibility. Paul helped her navigate through the crowd, collecting business cards and discussing potential collaborations. Suddenly, she spotted a familiar figure in a tailored suit across the room, Ethan Harrington. Her heart thundered in her chest. Of all the places, she hadn't seen him in person since that fateful night he had thrown her out. In a flash, memories of that moment. The icy sidewalk, the echo of the door slamming, surged back. She felt her stomach tighten in a mix of anxiety and a strange, simmering anger. Ethan was engaged in animated conversation with a group of investors, including Jonathan Friedman. Dread coiled in Sarah's stomach. Jonathan was her ally. He had believed in her vision. But he also had ties to Ethan, apparently. She considered leaving quietly, but the baby gave a firm kick as if to remind her to stand her ground. Paul noticed her tense posture. "Are you okay, Sarah?" She swallowed hard. "That's my ex-husband, Ethan Harrington, the CEO of Innova Spark." Paul's eyes widened. That Ethan Harrington. The one who she gave a quick nod, not wanting to elaborate in public. Let's just keep a low profile. Yet fate had other plans. Jonathan, glimpsing Sarah from across the room, waved her over. Her heart pounded in her ears as she and Paul approached the circle. She could feel Ethan's gaze like a beam of cold light, scanning her pregnant belly, then flitting to her face. "Jonathan," she said, maintaining composure. "It's good to see you." Jonathan smiled warmly. "Sarah, I was just bragging about Embermark to some colleagues. You remember Ethan Harrington from Innova Spark?" She nodded tightly, forcing a polite smile. "Yes, we've met." A flicker of surprise crossed Ethan's face, replaced by guardedness. He extended a hand, and Sarah shook it briefly, feeling the ghost of a tremor in her fingers. "Hello, Sarah," Ethan said quietly, his voice laced with something unreadable. Jonathan launched into an enthusiastic explanation of Sarah's startup, praising her grit and the uniqueness of Embermark's approach to small business analytics. "Sounds interesting," Ethan said smoothly. "I remember you being quite supportive of tech ventures." The words dripped with irony. Sarah's throat tightened, but she managed a level tone. "Yes, I suppose we both ended up in the same industry after all." The conversation was brief, with Jonathan guiding them toward mutual acquaintances. Sarah couldn't help but notice the tension in Ethan's jaw, the small lines of stress around his eyes. Once upon a time, she would have felt a rush of concern. Now she just felt conflicted. Part of her wanted him to see that she was thriving without him. Part of her still ached with a sense of betrayal. When the group dispersed, Ethan caught her elbow gently. "Sarah, can we talk for a moment? In private?" She hesitated, then nodded. Paul shot her a questioning look, and she gestured that she'd be fine. They stepped into a quiet corner of the venue, near a towering glass window. The city spread out before them, a sea of glittering lights. "How are you?" he asked, not quite meeting her eyes. She placed a protective hand over her belly. "Better than I thought I'd be, all things considered." A flicker of guilt seemed to cross his face. "I heard rumors you were working on a startup. Didn't realize it was with Friedman." "Now you know," she said curtly. "Congratulations on your success. I'm sure you've heard I'm pregnant." Ethan's gaze dropped to her belly, which left no room for doubt. I have. Through the lawyers. A tense silence settled. Finally, Ethan spoke, his voice quiet. Look, Sarah, I didn't mean for things to get so. She cut him off, her tone sharper than she intended. You didn't mean to throw me out in the middle of the night when I was pregnant with your child? He winced. That situation was complicated. I was under a lot of pressure. You were caring about our family. Yes, I know. Her eyes flashed with a bitterness she'd fought hard to bury. She thought of the baby inside her, the sleepless nights on Izzy's couch, the humiliating visits to a resource center. Ethan had stripped her of security, yet here he was, trying to rewrite the past. He inhaled deeply. I messed up. I see that now. I can't change what happened, but maybe I can help with finances. Or Sarah laughed, but it was a hollow sound. Like child support. He nodded stiffly. That's on the table. My attorneys can contact yours. Let's work something out. Sarah's throat felt tight. Part of her wanted to hurl the offer back in his face. Another part knew she had to think about her child. Fine, she said at last. We'll see where that goes. But don't think for a second that money changes what you did. He swallowed and nodded. Understood. Before he could say more, she turned, leaving him in the hush of city lights. As she walked away, she felt a storm of emotions, swirling anger, sorrow, and surprisingly, a strange pity for him. He looked lost, worn out by the success he'd once craved. She pushed the thought aside, focusing on the future she was determined to carve out. That night, as she lay in bed at Izzy's apartment, exhaustion weighed her down. She replayed the conversation with Ethan, the flicker of something like regret in his eyes. She tried to drown it out with memories of his cruelty, but a question gnawed at her. What if he really did want to make amends in some small way? In the weeks that followed, Ethan's lawyers reached out proposing a settlement to cover prenatal and childbirth expenses, plus a modest monthly stipend. After consulting with Izzy and her own legal aid, Sarah agreed reluctantly. The funds would be placed in a trust for the baby. She refused to rely on Ethan's money for Embermark, but the child deserved financial support. Life, with its own dramatic timing, didn't wait for all the legalities to settle. One morning, Sarah's water broke unexpectedly. She was alone in the Embermark office, finalizing details for an upcoming beta test. Panic and excitement roiled inside her. She managed to call Izzy, who raced over and rushed her to the hospital. After 14 hours of labor, Sarah gave birth to a beautiful baby boy. She named him Theodore, meaning gift from God. In the private hospital room, she cradled Theo in her arms, overwhelmed by a profound mixture of love, relief, and triumph. Izzy stayed by her side, snapping photos and wiping tears. Paul, though awkward around newborns, dropped by with flowers and an enormous teddy bear. Sarah gazed at her son's tiny fingers curled around her own. In that moment, the chaos of the past year faded, replaced by pure wonder. She kissed his forehead. We made it, little one. We made it. Ethan didn't come. Word must have reached him, but he stayed away, perhaps not ready to face the consequences of fatherhood. The hospital forms listed father unknown by Sarah's choice, a move that stung but felt necessary. She refused to let his name overshadow Theo's first breath of life. In a quiet moment while Theo slept, Sarah stared out the window at the bustling city below. A surge of gratitude welled up. She had found a path forward when everything seemed lost. She had a healthy baby, a budding startup, and a resolute spirit. And somewhere in the back of her mind, a new idea was forming, a vision of the day she would reclaim not just her personal life, but also stand in a position of power that even Ethan couldn't ignore. Little did she know the grandest twist of fate still awaited her. 6 months. That's all it took for Embermark to go from a fledgling startup to a buzzworthy disruptor in the tech world. With Theo cradled in one arm and her laptop balanced on the other, Sarah juggled motherhood and entrepreneurship with tireless determination. Sleep-deprived but driven, she led the company with heart, and the results showed. Small businesses flocked to Embermark's affordable AI-driven analytics. Fed up with overpriced, bloated tools, they embraced Sarah's user-friendly platform. Media outlets took notice. Headlines called her the single mom CEO, shaking up Silicon Valley. Photos of Sarah baby carrier strapped on as she typed on her laptop circulated widely, capturing public admiration. Meanwhile, Ethan Harrington's world was unraveling. Though InnovaSpark had once soared, it was now faltering. The company had grown too fast, lost focus, and was bleeding talent. Top engineers quit. Investors grew anxious. PR scandals and rumors of a toxic work culture eroded its image. Sequoia Capital's Margaret Chen, once supportive, now pressured the board for new leadership. Then one morning, Jonathan Friedman called Sarah. "There's an offer on the table," he said. "A private equity firm wants to acquire Embermark." Sarah's breath caught. "Seriously? They see real growth potential, and they want you to stay on as CEO." But Jonathan hesitated. "They're also interested in a dual play, possibly merging Embermark with InnovaSpark." Sarah went still. "You mean I'd be acquiring Ethan's company?" "Yes. InnovaSpark still has valuable patents and infrastructure. Embermark has the traction. Together they'd dominate the market. They want you at the helm." The thought was surreal. The very company that had propelled Ethan to fortune and destroyed her marriage might soon be hers. Vindication, mixed with hesitation. "I won't do this for revenge," she said. "Only if it makes sense for the future." Exactly what I hoped you'd say. A week later, Sarah sat across from Ethan in a sleek, glass-walled boardroom. Representatives from both companies and the private equity firm flanked them. Paul sat at her side. Jonathan, as always, looked confident. Ethan, though, dressed in his usual sharp suit, looked exhausted, his jaw tight. "Let's begin," said Davis Green, the equity firm's rep. "We propose a stock swap merger. Embermark absorbs InnovaSpark. Ms. Harrington remains CEO of the new entity." A murmur spread through the InnovaSpark board. Ethan stiffened. InnovaSpark still holds immense value. "This isn't a fire sale." Jonathan responded calmly. "That value is sinking. Embermark is growing. The merger keeps both relevant." Margaret Chen, appearing via video, added, "We want a path to profitability. Embermark has the clearest one." Sarah finally spoke. "This isn't about punishing anyone. It's about creating something stronger. InnovaSpark has good tech. We have the audience. Let's build something sustainable." Ethan looked at her for a long beat. He said nothing, but the resistance in his posture faded just slightly. The negotiations dragged on for weeks. Legal teams wrangled over valuations and equity shares. Sarah insisted Ethan's involvement be limited to an optional advisory role. His stake would be significantly diluted, but he'd retain some connection if he chose. When the final deal was signed, Embermark officially acquired InnovaSpark. The new entity would be called EmberSpark. On signing day, Sarah entered the same high-rise, where she'd once been thrown out of meetings, as just the wife. She now sat at the head of the table. Ethan sat across from her, stoic. As the final documents were stamped and passed around, Sarah felt a quiet sense of closure. Not triumph in the petty sense, but something deeper. She had taken back what was once used to belittle her, and she had turned it into power. Afterward, Ethan approached. "You did it," he said, voice low. Sarah turned. "No. We did what was right for both companies." He studied her. "You've built something remarkable." She nodded. "You had your moment. Now it's mine." A pause. "I didn't see this coming. Not from you." "That's because you stopped looking," she replied, her tone even. "You forgot who stood beside you when it all began." There was regret in his eyes. "I know I hurt you. More than I can ever fix." Sarah's gaze didn't waver. "And yet here we are." He sighed. "If it's not too late, I want to be part of Theo's life, however you see fit." She looked down for a moment, thinking. "We'll take it slow. He deserves a chance to know his father. But you'll need to earn both our trust." Ethan nodded. "Fair." Later that night, Sarah stood by the window of her new office in the Ember Spark building, the Chicago skyline glowing around her. Theo's photo sat on her desk, smiling in a little bow tie. Her journey from midnight on the sidewalk to the top of the tech world had been anything but easy. But she made it. And this was only the beginning. After the acquisition, Ember Spark pulsed with new energy. Sarah built a leadership team that blended Embermark's scrappy innovation with InnovaSpark's powerful tech. Employees once ready to quit now felt revived under her compassionate leadership. The office, a renovated industrial loft downtown, buzzed with collaboration and sunlight, no more corner office elitism, just a flat, open culture. Sarah normalized motherhood at work. Theo, now a lively toddler, often visited after daycare. Staff adored him, and Sarah's visible dual role as CEO and mother inspired admiration and respect. She made it clear women didn't have to choose between ambition and family. The company's upgraded analytics suite, fusing InnovaSpark's patented algorithms with Embermark's usability, was a hit. Small businesses long priced out of tech solutions flocked to what the press dubbed the People's Analytics. Profits climbed. Sequoia Capital's Margaret Chen praised Sarah's culture of innovation and empathy. Meanwhile, Sarah and Ethan's dynamic remained cautiously civil. He began supervised visits with Theo in parks and cafes, trying in small, awkward steps to rebuild what he'd thrown away. Though their romance was over, a delicate co-parenting rhythm emerged. Ethan even lingered after board meetings to bounce a ball with Theo. He was no longer the domineering CEO, just a man trying to be a father. Recognition followed. A year in Forbes named Sarah to its top 30 under 40 list, hailing her as a mother mogul and trailblazer. She read the article with quiet tears. It wasn't about fame, it was proof that she had reclaimed her story. Then came the tech world's biggest stage, a product launch at McCormick Place. Sarah stood backstage, nerves fluttering. A note card in hand read, "Believe in yourself always." Paul gave a thumbs up. She smiled. Showtime. On stage, Sarah spoke with poise blending product vision and personal resilience. In the front row, she spotted Ethan. He nodded once respectfully. When she finished, the audience rose in a standing ovation. For a moment, the world saw what she had always known. She wasn't broken. she was reborn. That night on the Emberspark rooftop, Sarah gazed at the Chicago skyline, mug of tea in hand. Ethan joined her, quiet beside her. "You were incredible," he said softly. She nodded. "Thanks." A pause passed between them, filled with wind and memory. "I'm proud of you," Ethan added. "More than I ever said before." She didn't reply at first. "Then we can't undo the past. But we can shape the future. For Theo." He nodded, mist in his eyes. "I'd like to try." They weren't lovers anymore. But they were something else, co-parents, maybe even allies. As Ethan left, Sarah remained staring into the lights reflected on Lake Michigan. From the ashes of betrayal she had risen. Not for revenge, but for herself, for her son, and for the life she now owned with pride. And so in the end, Sarah Harrington proved that the darkest trials can spark the brightest flames of triumph. Once cast aside at midnight, she rose to become the visionary leader of Emberspark, a company that outshone even the Emma her ex-husband had built. With unwavering grit and the love for her child guiding her, Sarah rewrote her destiny. She didn't simply survive heartbreak, she transformed it into a catalyst for greatness. If her journey has inspired you, if it's reminded you that no betrayal, no setback, and no cruel twist of fate can truly extinguish the power of hope, then let Sarah's story live on in your heart. Please like, share, and subscribe so we can continue exploring stories of resilience and redemption. Every gesture of support fuels our mission to spotlight untold tales that remind us we all have the strength to rise again. Thank you for watching, and remember to keep believing.